Okay, now we are live. We will be hearing two introductions by our esteemed chair. And the first one is H772, an act relating to residential rental agreements, eviction procedures, and the creation of the Positive Rental Payment Credit Reporting Pilot Program. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark Mahaly, Director representing Plainfield, Townsend, Marshfield. So, I guess it was during the summer that I started talking to our counterpart in the Senate, Allison Clarkson. It's pretty obvious that right now, the status quo with respect to landlord-tenant law isn't great. It's a rising rents, rising costs, combined with almost no housing availability has meant that people who are evicted very often are becoming homeless. Contrarily, landlords are just feeling like the business model is broken and they don't want to be in it and they want to leave. And certainly, most importantly, don't want to invest in expansion. And so the situation is one of these situations where the status quo is bad for everybody. Conversely, on the other hand, it's a field that has been marked by really strong disagreements, very powerful disagreements between landlords and tenants, both unorganized and organized, and a lot of mutual unhappiness and distrust. And it is, I guess in that kind of situation, it's unclear whether dissatisfaction with the status quo is sufficient to overcome resistance to compromise or not. We have complicated political situation, which everybody knows, so there's no sense in beating around the bush. There's 4 other bills, at least, on our wall having to do with landlord-tenant issues. Saudi has a bill, Debbie has a bill, Chloe has a bill. In addition, there are 2 other bills that deal more certain specific issues. But so what Allison and I decided to try was to see if we could produce a compromise bill, and which is always a hazardous effort. And that's why, and we just decided to do it, and we worked on it. We worked on it during the summer. We met with tenant advocates, we met with landlord advocates and landlords, and we came up with the bill. I'm not pretending by any means that this bill is perfect. It's a compromise. It's very deliberately aimed at being a compromise. So there's lots of things that either side would like that are not in this bill. The theory behind the bill very simply is pretty simple, rather brutally simple, which is to give each side what it most wants, regardless of the fact that the other side really doesn't want what
The other side
wants. It really focus on giving each side what it wants. So I'll give you a couple of examples, but I'm not going to take a lot of time on it because we'll have a walkthrough and I guess in a couple of weeks, 10 days when we take this up. But here's and also things are connected with each other. So it's hard to tease it apart, but I'll give you a couple of examples with the understanding that we'll have a detailed walkthrough later. What tenants really want is an end to no-cause eviction. Period. I mean, that's not all of it, but that's a really, really important thing. So this bill ends no-cause eviction. What landlords really want is a much simpler and faster eviction process, and this does it.
with costs.
with cause. Tenants, landlords are very concerned, nonprofit and for-profit, about the problem of the drug dealing or violent tenant that is destroying property. The easiest way for them to deal with that is to have no cause eviction. Because then they can just get rid of a tenant who's violent. The problem they face is that if you take away no cause, which we have done in this bill, is that they can't prove cause because they can't get other tenants who are fearing for their lives and safety to testify against the violent or drug dealing tenant. And this is a very common problem. So this bill contains a provision. I'll go into the weeds just 1 minute as an example. It contains a provision that says that a landlord can file an affidavit under penalty of perjury alleging the facts that say that this person, let's say, is a drug dealer. And then there is very quickly, a show cause hearing, like within a week, in which if the tenant has to show up and under penalty of perjury state facts that would be contrary to that, in which case there's a hearing. But if the tenant does not show up or there are no facts, tenant is quickly out. Is that a perfect substitute for no cause? No. There are things, the reasons landlord wants no cause is because it helps them deal with the tenant that makes them, particularly if it's the landlord is a woman, makes them just feel unsafe. They haven't done anything wrong, they just creepy, or they don't like them. Well, sorry, that's not a reason to keep no cause in this compromise bill. But on the other hand, we have left in the ability of the landlord to simply not renew a lease. In other words, if you sign a lease for 12 months, that's what you're signing. The landlord is not signing a lease for life. They're signing a lease for 12 months. So I don't want to go into all of the details, but that's just an example of the back and forth. Tenants very much would like to see what I would call rent control. That is a control over rents generally. And there are states that have that, although most don't. This bill does not contain rent control. But it does, on the other hand, we have a big problem in Vermont that there have been a lot of situations where a building has been sold. The original landlord, walks away with a very substantial gain. The new owner comes in and really jacks up the rent. That can't happen under this bill. In that situation, for 12 months after the sale, the rent increase is limited to CPI plus 3%. Tenants would like that kind of a provision across the board. It's not in this bill. I'm just giving you examples of things we didn't put in the bill and things we did. And frankly, whether that's a fool's errand, as I keep liking to say, and it's just everybody's going to be so unhappy with it, it won't go anywhere, or whether people will live with something like the compromises, I don't know. I see it as a vehicle for this committee to work with all of the other, and when we do have a walkthrough, the walkthrough is going to be on all of the landlord tenant bills. Just comparing, like Debbie has, for example, one more example, then I'll stop. I'm just trying to give you a flavor. Right now, there are certain things in the process that take 30 days. We've limited it to 14 days. Debbie has a bill where it's 3 days. I'm just trying to give, and in California, there's places where it's 3 days. So that's kind of an example. In some, I'm humbly putting this out as a as a vehicle for people to discuss whether there is common ground. Finally, I will acknowledge a problem. I don't have an answer to this problem. When you have a situation where there are really bad actors on both sides, and there are terrible landlords and there are just terrible tenants. When you have a situation with really bad actors on both sides, the tendency for each side is to want to address the bad actors. But you have to be careful because most people aren't bad actors. Most tenants are great tenants. Most landlords are fine. But if you aren't careful and you address the bad actors, you can hurt the good actors by going to be too extreme, by doing something that doesn't make sense for the big middle. And so that's a real problem when you're trying to craft legislation where you have these extreme examples. So that's why we did it, why I did it. It's in the Senate, it's here, it's not moving in the Senate. Senator Clarkson and I agreed that we would start it here. That's partly because we have a similar situation with appeals, the whole housing permit appeals process. We have both of us introduced bills to try to accelerate the appeals process and to make it harder to challenge housing. And it's going to start in the Senate. There's just no way that she can do both appeals and landlord tenants who just agreed that that's the way we do it. So we're starting it here. We have a lot on our plate, I imagine 10 days from now. This will be on our plate. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes.
When we do the walkthrough of all this bill and all similar bills, will that be an opportunity or will there be created in that process an opportunity for the other ideas that were not made or were not bills in this biennium to also be enunciated?
Of course. And I do think that I'm hoping, that actually a walkthrough of all 5 bills isn't going to be that hard because I don't think you do it by saying, oh, walk through Debbie's bill. It does. What you do is issue by issue. What's the position here on trespass? What's the position on, et cetera. So yeah, I think so.
Thanks.
And also, by the way, the bills that haven't been introduced will be introduced by their authors first, and we will ask both Saudia, whose bill was introduced, but so long ago that it has escaped my memory, to not introduce it, but to speak to it. And we'll ask Debbie, of course, to introduce hers. Yes, Joe.
One of the common problems is that I have, as a landlord, you'd say, like, I have avenues to do this. It's just there's 1,000 delay stall. I have, every right to do this, this, and this, and it still takes 6 months. Does your bill address that part of it?
Well,
Like hard and fast
part
things where
of
the decision
at my
shall be made?
request, part of the bill was drafted by attorneys for landlords with the idea of doing that, of reducing that. It doesn't eliminate it. It reduces it. Reduces the delay a lot. There will be presented to the committee a table which looks at about like 5 or 6 states and shows how long, more or less, I mean, of course, it's an average, how long the process takes in each state. And I will tell you, we are an outlier. But that's not the end of the process. I mean, it's easy to look at the list and say, oh my God, we're so pro-tenant. It's not that simple because some of the states that are much faster have very strong tenant protections that we don't have. But that are not on our bill.
In your
way.
In your work on this, did you look at that, like how Vermont is viewed nationally?
Yes,
As,
not how we're viewed nationally, just
well,
what's the situation in other states.
yeah, for
Yes.
any type of rating
Yes,
type of
yes.
schedule, are we like which
Right.
side do we skew?
This is where,
if you're-
in terms of the length of eviction process, just that narrow issue, we are one of the longest. This bill would move us to kind of the middle, a little maybe better than the middle. We're also one of the states, we're not one of the most protective of tenant states either.
In what ways?
No.
In,
Do I know what?
in what ways? Can you give any examples? Just
Yes.
Curious.
Yeah, I mean, there are states that will not allow anybody to raise rent more than a certain amount. There are states that require landlord, the federal government has require landlords, if they do not renew a lease, to pay to relocate the tenant. There,
What?
relocate the tenant. I mean, there's a huge range. We are not amongst the most protected of tenant states. Yes.
Do you know how many states there are in the country that don't require written leases?
No, I don't know how many. I do know that
Is it more
one
than
of the
one?
common. Gee, I'm getting into the details, but one of the provisions that a lot of tenant organizations want is a requirement of a written 12-month lease. And some bills, and I tend to think that if you require a 12-month lease, you would have to do it. Say what has to be in the lease at some length. That's not in this bill.
So according to Google, while all 50 states generally allow oral rental agreements, no state strictly requires a written lease for a tenancy to be legally binding.
There are, part of the problem is there's many situations where a month-to-month lease really makes sense. Other situations where a weekly lease makes sense. And we just didn't get into it. And partly, but I will tell you, it was nothing more that I don't want to pretend that there's a lot of science behind this. A lot of it was just a sense of what would fly. My feeling is that if a bill has to proceed, it has to proceed on a bipartisan basis or it won't succeed. It'll either won't get out of the House or it'll be vetoed.
Can I just make a comment? My daughter rented an apartment in the north end of Boston for like 14 years. She never had a lease and she had the best landlord.
Sometimes
And then
there's an
she
example.
moved and then it was the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, that's an example, you have to be careful.
Yeah.
There's so many stories of good relationships that are on a handshake.
So right now, is it 30 days, 60 days, and then it can go to legal and go to court? And let's say that's true. How much time does it take from then to evict somebody where the sheriff
I
would
can
come?
only say one thing and the rest I can't remember off the top of my head. But we will have a walkthrough that will tell you all of that.
Okay.
But my impression is in Vermont, from the time, you have to give a 30-day notice mostly, but it depends. But let's just say 30 days. From the time of the expiration of that notice,
Notice of eviction. we're
the
talking.
notice of eviction, from the time of that moment to the time that a tenant is effectively evicted is in Vermont is approximately 4 months. It can be 6. In certain circumstances where the tenant is aggressively represented and has lots of money or has lots of money, it can be a lot longer than 6 months. It can be shorter. Part of the problem is that it's like anything else, tenant landlords who are generally, but not always by any means represented. If they are well represented, it's faster. If they are not, it can be really long.
Is this rent arrears and behavior? Like, is there any difference between whether they're behind in their rent? Or if they're just an undesirable or they're wrecking things. Does that make sense?
It's written out.
Are you talking about currently right now?
Yeah,
I would say it's up to the discretion of the landlord, because your landlord could very easily say, hey, I heard you were in a car accident and you now have to pay to get your car fixed, and I accept that, like, I'll let you be late this time. Like, so it's up to the discretion.
Mhm.
Or you could have a landlord be like, you're a date late, you're done.
There is also a rental arrears program, which is actually run by a person who's sitting in this room. And the bill contains an appropriation of $1 million, which violates my promise to the chair of the appropriations committee that I would never ask for 6 figures from her. But it is a program that is an administratively created program pursuant to a very quick little mention, and it is one that is up for discussion as to what it will contain. But it helps people in that situation that the vice chair just mentioned, someone who has the ability over time to pay, but some event has happened that makes it difficult. And I believe the tenant and the landlord have to agree to invoke the program.
I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
Is that the only appropriation in the bill?
Give me one moment, Madam Vice Chair. I thought there was.
200,000 to CVOEO for
Yeah,
landlord.
that's right. CVOEO, as I mentioned, one of the things we wanted to do in this bill, because I actually think it would make a difference for the people in the middle who aren't the bad actors, is to have a serious educational program for tenants and for landlords on their rights, their obligations, and their remedies. And CVOEO already does this and they have agreed to run such a program. And I believe that if they do, but it's not in the bill, they will be working with legal aid on that. There are so many landlords who are small landlords who really don't know, what they can do, what their rights are, what the remedies, so of course, many tenants who don't know.
Are there any more questions? All right. We are now going to hear H 775, an act relating to creating tools for housing production. And we are honored to have not one, but 2 sponsors here to talk about the bill. Thank God for that.
I just want to say one more thing still on the landlord tenant. One of the problems that we face in Vermont, and perhaps you've all seen them in other areas, is we're not like other states in that we tend to be dominated by small entities, not large. The landlords here generally there's a lot more small landlords who, can't tolerate what some big outfit can, and we have to.
That depends on your town.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. There are towns and where there are big landlords. And some of the biggest landlords are nonprofits. And Champlain Housing Trust is a very big one. So, Tom and I started talking about this last year when we were working on CHIP. We just felt CHIP, remember CHIP, guys? It was designed with the idea that it would be simpler than tax increment was, and that it would work for rural Vermont. And we feel like, yes, hopefully it will, but not for real rural Vermont and not for really small projects. that a project of 5 homes or 10 homes built by a small developer was never gonna be able to navigate CHIP. And so we started talking back then with what I will call a rural, it's not called in the bill, but a rural housing finance initiative. And we ended up with a bill with 5 key elements. And I'll run through them quickly. And one of the most important ones Tom will take, because he's really been working hard on it. A portion of the bill provides for a pilot program to run by, at this point, DHCD. I mean, that's up for grabs, but DHCD in this draft of the bill. And this pilot program, anybody with a project of less than 16 or less units in a town of 5,000 people or less can apply for this program. And if they are selected for this pilot program, they don't pay any additional property tax for 7 years, and then it goes up, and in the 10th year, they pay full property tax. And it's a 3-year program. It ends at the end. It's a pilot program. It expires in 3 years. And the idea is to see whether or not there are projects. Back up. One of the biggest problems we have in Vermont, as you know, is that Vermonters, by and large, cannot afford to buy or rent new construction because it costs too much. They just can't pay the rents or the mortgage to support the new construction. Well, what that means is that in places where in Vermont, where there's not a lot of capability to pay high rents, construction has kind of slowed down because it's hard. Developers can't make it work. So what do you do about that? Well, there's one answer is you make it easier for them to make it work. Well, how do you do that? Well, one way is you tell them that when they do their little spreadsheet, they don't have to include property taxes for 7 years, and then it just goes 25%, 50, 75. And the reason it's a pilot program is to allow JFO to say, here's what the maximum cost of this program will be to the education fund, period. You know, it just doesn't stretch way out into the future. And also, frankly, to find out whether anybody shows up. I mean, there are people, I mean, it's natural that the development community will always support something like this because why not? I mean, it's good. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that they'll actually be able to make it work, even with this kind of subsidy. I don't think the problem in Vermont outside of Chittenden County is, and maybe there, it's not but for, it's even with. So that's one piece. Another is, this is a little in the weeds, but compared to what you've been hearing in the last few days, you're used to the weeds by now.
I live there.
Yeah, you live in the weeds, yeah. One of the ways you can pay for improvements, whether it's a road leading, in the development or a playground or something like that, or any, cable, anything in the development, is to create a special assessment district. You draw a line around the development, you figure out what it's going to cost, and you may issue bonds, and the bonds pay for the thing, whatever it is, when you build the development. And the people who have to pay it off are the people who live in the developer in the beginning, and then when the house is sold, the people in the development, when they get their tax bill, they'll get an extra line that says, an extra $215 assessment for this, and it has to be revealed to them before they buy the house. That's a very common financing device throughout the United States. It helps developers raise money in a simple way. The problem we have in Vermont is select boards can create these assessment districts, but they can't sell the bonds without a vote of the whole town. And and that has been used to stop projects. Well, if the whole town was gonna pay, or the whole town's full faith and credit stood behind the bond, that's understandable. But these assessment bonds, the bondholder can't look to the town, they look to the development and those assessments, and that's all they get. And so they usually charge a little higher interest because it's riskier. But so this bill would provide no vote. If the full faith and credit of the town is not at stake, if the town is not backing the bonds, the only people who vote backing the bond is the developer or the development, there's no vote. It's just, if the town select board can create it. Which, by the way, is typical of most states.
Can I ask, so this would not be setting up a brand new development unless it was just the developers putting
It's
down the
only
money?
usually in a brand new development. In other words, when
So
I'm,
how
let's
could
say
there
I'm a
be a
developer.
vote? There are no people living there yet.
It's just the developer.
Got it, okay.
Yeah.
That's the,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention the tax. First thing I mentioned, where you don't pay any taxes. That only works small towns, small development, no chip. You can't do chip and that. It's for small projects, yes.
I'm confused. It's not in a town?
Yeah,
Oh, then what would,
I was saying if it's a new development and what the chair's proposing is that in most places, the whole town gets to vote.
On the
Even though on whether this small group of people can borrow money
Right.
to build a small thing within the town boundary.
right,
And he's saying that doesn't make sense because the town, there could be just that knee-jerk reaction, no, don't spend any money, even though it's not gonna be money out of their pockets.
right.
Or risk to them. So I was just curious, but when there's no people in the development to vote yes, then how does it ever
In the
get
beginning,
passed?
It's just the developer.
In
That's
the
why
beginning, right,
actually.
that's why I was
the way we
asking.
struck- Actually, go ahead.
It's like co-signing a loan with debt. So
Yeah.
the town, it's the town's credit that's being considered, setting the bond, that's why the town votes on it. But if the town's credit is not part of the picture, it's just the developer and how that project pencils out, then it doesn't reflect.
Right, but
But the
then,
reason it goes up at the end, in other words, like for 7 years, I think, there's no. It'll pay tax more than the original, whatever, for the parking lot or whatever.
yeah, no increment.
But then it goes up 25%, 50, 75, and then 100. It's because by then people are living there and they're the ones paying it off, and we just don't want property taxes to land on people in year 10 all at once, so it kind of goes up. But otherwise, in the beginning, in this case, there's no vote. The reason there's no vote is because the only person who would vote in the beginning is the developer.
Right,
And the developer won't ask for it unless they want it. I mean, it's not like it can be imposed on them.
and this is just for housing development, it's not for infrastructure or
No,
other improvements, so it could be.
It could be, no, it's just for the. It's just infrastructure usually. Then, keep going. I don't know if you remember, but the treasurer has a program called 10% for Vermont. We have a lot of money in the state. It's just, invested in very liquid ways. He's got, I don't know, I really don't know how much. Billions just floating around because we have money washing in and out of the treasury all the time. And it has to be pretty liquid because, we need it when you need it. But it doesn't all have to be liquid. And the treasurer has a program which we authorized, and it's legislation called 10% from Vermont, that allowed the treasurer to take 10% of the money, the balance, and invest it in housing. And they do. They have a committee, they issue RFPs, they get proposals, they make very low interest loans, 2, 3, 4%, depending. This bill makes two changes to that. With the treasurer's office, been very helpful. One is it's not 10% per month anymore, it's 12.5%. Because the treasurer feels comfortable now that we can use a little more money. That's really something. The second is, the treasurer has a lot of money out on loans now to developments and gets paid interest. The interest on that goes back into the general fund. In this bill, it goes back to housing. And then finally, and then before we get to the real kicker here, which is the what's the word, off-site modular accelerator. You remember VHIP, the Vermont Housing Improvement, what's it? Vermont Housing
Improvement
Improvement Program. VHIP gives up to 50 grand plus 20 more for accessibility to landlords to upgrade their units. So it's been very successful. One very little small thing about it is it's a reimbursement program. The landlord who applies, they have to pay for the whole thing. And then they get their money back up to 50 grand or 70 from the state, but they have to be able to front the money. Okay? We worried that this wouldn't work too well for the small developer in a rural area, and so it gives them the ability to advance the money ahead of time. So instead of asking the developer applies, they're approved for the program, the work begins, but as the work is done, they can have the ability to pay for the work as it's done. And then instead of the usual process where the developer pays for it as it goes, and then they reimburse the developer. Yes,
My understanding, and when I've asked it, every time I have received the same answer, which is that VHIP is not to be used for developers.
well, it's the landlord,
They said no.
The homeowner.
the home, the
You just said
owner of the
developer.
unit. Yeah, the owner of the unit. I'm
So-
sorry, yeah.
So this, like, VHIP is not being used in conjunction with the developers.
No.
VHIP is specifically only restricted to single residences. Is that?
Or, well, no, it can be, if you have a 5-unit building, you can rehab a 5-unit.
Well, single,
Ownership.
I think it was just a slip of the tongue.
Well,
Would be
I'm just want to, because I just want to verify that that is not,
I mean,
it
I
is
think
not
it's the
being used
owner
by
of the
developers.
building, yeah.
And that the owner of the building is not a developer, that is a person who I think originally it was supposed to be a person who resided on premises, right?
I don't-
I can't remember.
I don't think the bill changes the program other than to provide money up front for, if you're gonna pay someone to come in and rehab the unit, they're gonna ask for a deposit. And not.
Yeah, right. We already agreed that that was an
I think that's the
inequity.
deal.
Yeah.
That's the bit-
It doesn't change anything. It's literally one line.
Okay, thank you.
So do we look at it as like a 0% loan or just like, so it's
Effectively,
being
yes.
dispersed little by little?
It's a 0% construction loan.
Right, in home
Yes.
improvement.
Yeah,
And it's not for new construction, it's to improve a home that has, a rental unit that has
Or
become,
a unit that is not up to
Almost
code and
uninhabitable
probably wouldn't be
or-
rented out.
okay. Or to make it accessible.
Right,
But just to clarify, we have not defined what accessibility is, so those grants are not actually,
Being used for,
or reimbursements are being used. So,
you mean it's mostly the 50 grand and not 20?
because we didn't have the study, because the study got cut, they haven't defined what accessibility actually is. So that is not a real program.
so should we address that in this bill?
They are coming in to talk about the,
We'll have Sean Gilpin to talk
We'll have Sean.
about what's been done and any questions that we might have.
then we have the housing accelerator.
Hammers and nails. I'm Charles, representing Chapter Athens, Grafton, Wyndham, for those that are just tuning into our program now. This, the offsite construction accelerator, name that has been taken from language of the governor's housing bill, which is another committee. This is specific to the procuring bulk ordered offsite manufactured housing. That is, and just to continue the distinctions and the vocabulary, there are trailers, there are mobile homes, there are manufactured homes, and offsite manufactured housing is modular or panelized. And they're very much a lot of the same construction, in some cases as a stick-built home, but you can build them faster, you build them indoors all winter long. It's easier to use equipment, so their workforce is much more diverse because you don't have to carry stacks of rafters up a ladder. The people who had in last year, as you may recall, and talked about modular building, Huntington Homes, Vermont Home Laminates. They both made the comment that the savings in using this type of construction is only realized when they're not having to retool for every single house they build. If they build the same unit a number of times over, that's where the savings can be realized. What this section of the bill does is it enables Commerce and Community Development of the Department of Buildings General Services, who does most of the procurement for the state, in collaboratively with the Treasurer's Office. It enables them to pull together there's a lot of groups working on very similar concepts. This has been talked about both in the VHFA report that was given to us at the beginning of the last session about offsite construction, the 802 homes for all, to some degree, let's build homes, and everybody's having these conversations. This enables them to pull all of those groups and key players together, develop a pilot program, and launch the pilot program. There are criteria in the bill as to defining what we want the program to do. My intention is to give them the latitude rather than try to micromanage what they know how to do, or us rather, is to give them some parameters and let them develop it as they determine it will best work. The intention of the accelerator is to be able to put together these bulk purchases. And most small developments, we're talking earlier in the bill about developments of up to 16 units, they're not going to hit the magic number for a bulk order and savings. So what we are asking these departments to do is coordinate among a variety of end customers. The purchase of a single, say there's and I'm not saying this hypothetically, I don't know if this is how it will play out, but say there is a pre-permitted, pre-engineered, pre-blueprinted model from 802 Homes catalog for a duplex. And Brandon wants 2, and somebody up in Milk Bucket Flats wants 4, and somebody down our end of the state wants 3. Amongst a number of small developers, the state then puts together a bulk order that will have that reduction in price. Open places the order, and this is where the treasurer's 2.5% comes in. You guarantee that order. The end customer is not the state. The state's just assuring that purchase. They get delivered to wherever they say to go. So we're asking them to coordinate this on behalf of small projects and pass the cost savings on to the small developers, so that that is another piece of how their project pencils out, making it possible, and making it a little bit less expensive. There are two advantages to the modular homes, right off the bat, in small developments in particular. One is that they appreciate for customers or families that are looking to build some equity down the road, they do appreciate the same rate as a stick-built on-site house. They are generally better insulated, they're a little sturdier, and there are, of course, variations in quality. The second is that with a small development, there is less of a need to utilize federal funding. One, it's not in the same availability that it once was. Also, in talking to contractors in particular, there are a lot of additional criteria for accountability, reporting, and different standards of everything from hiring standards to building standards that get very, very complicated and are expensive to administer at the contractor end. And which means this is part of what drives the per unit cost of some of the bigger developments up. The federal funding is still a benefit, but for $100, it's not $100 benefit, it's more like 60. Because you have to pay people to administer all this stuff. So the smaller developments have the additional advantage of being, just by virtue of the fact they're simpler to manage. It's just another way that they can make that cost competitive for whatever families or people are looking to purchase.
It's,
Can I ask
just
a
to
question?
clarify
Yeah.
one thing or emphasize it. As Tom said, this is not a program where the state buys these houses.
Right.
The developer's gonna buy them. But if you're gonna ask Huntington Home to open up a whole new line, and produce 40 or something, the state stands behind it.
Yeah.
So that, and the treasurer has been very helpful here and worked with us. They stand behind it so that Huntington feels like they can do that. And one of the things that emerged from our testimony last year is that off-site modular homes, if you don't have bulk ordering, they're not really much less expensive
Mhm.
than just regular stick-built homes. But bulk ordering has the capability of bringing that down. And that's what this stuff intended to do.
That's where.
And just finally, I want to mention one thing. The way we're managing this, we're launching this Friday in a joint, that's tomorrow.
After lunch.
After lunch, in a joint hearing with Congress. Because we thought we would do it the same way that we did last year with TIF, where Commerce hears it. Commerce will take care of the tax stabilization and the special assessment. They do that stuff. They won't have possession of the bill. We'll keep possession of the bill, but they'll do the hearing and the writing and the rewriting and then just give to us their work. We'll do the 10% for Vermont, the offsite accelerator and the VHIT part.
I was just curious, I know that we had heard that, that there were cost savings. Do we have a sense? Do we have a percentage? If right now every unit is 500,000 or 600,000 for affordable housing, what would we be talking
So
for
manufacturers
three-person,
don't
three
have
bedroom?
an actual figure, it's gonna depend on the model as much as anything else. That will determine how many units, where the sweet spot is, because there will be a certain number below, beyond which it's not gonna change the price much. But they're gonna have to look at the design and the criteria and materials, things that have to be, worked out, for instance, through two homes. This is criteria the department will have to look at and standardize, really. There may be options to order from multiple suppliers. There are several in the state. One development might want to use cross mod. construction, another one might want to use panelized construction and do the finish locally. The volume, I think the largest plan is Huntington at the moment for volumetric, the big box on, on the flatbed truck. One additional, when you know that I feel strongly about, one additional advantage of off-site manufactured homes is it does not run into certified payroll, Davis-Bacon, prevailing wage if it is built indoors in the plant. Prevailing wage applies once they get to site. If they're only on site 1 or 2 days, that's another, that's generally a little more safe. It's all just little bits and pieces that bring the eventual price down to a range.
We're learning, remember something about development. It's the real world.
Yeah.
It was not constructed by a set of ideas. It's just people, right? What that means is that there's no such thing as a definition. There's no legal definition of things. It's just what people say, what the words that they've invented. So we have in this committee said manufactured homes have been generally single wides and double wides, like we saw at Fecto. Okay, that's manufactured. Then you have on the other side Huntington homes, which is essentially building like a house that looks just like a stick-built house. But instead of building it out on the site, it's building it in the factory and bringing it. And we call those off-site modular homes or volumetric homes. The problem, of course, is that as things change, the manufactured houses get bigger and they're 2-story versions and they look more and more like a regular house. And, but so you can't be too rigid with these definitions. They're just comments, they're just what's applied out there in the real world. But this accelerator contemplates, it's not an accelerator for single wides and double wides. It's for
Modular.
modular homes,
Yeah.
which are, yeah. And what the savings will be, I think that some of the models that we saw in 802 homes, where those pilot programs going on, some of them are single-story duplexes. They could be pretty cheap.
Yeah.
But they won't be $150,000.
That was my question.
Yeah, they won't be. No, I mean, I don't know what they'll be, but they won't be half of what it costs. It'll be, but a substantial savings. I just don't know. We won't know until it happens.
We have Elizabeth had a question and then Gail had a question.
Did you take into consideration the possibility of requiring universal design for these homes?
I would defer the answer given Chris Coffin. Somebody was in here from Let's Build Homes, 802 Homes. And most of the designs, he pointed out one design on the slide, but most of them have at least one accessible unit. If
That's not what I'm asking.
for.
I am asking whether,
You're not
When
gonna
you-
wiggle out of it with her.
I'm asking whether you took into consideration requiring universal design for any, not a portion, but all of the designs, not just from 802 homes, or from anybody who's going to get state money.
I think the department will have to issue a request for proposals, which will have all the specs in it that they expect the companies to bid on. So basically, they go out to bid.
And do you think that they will do that on their own without being required?
Why don't we just say, no?
I think we're,
I want you to say it out loud.
I know. I'm
No, we
saying
did not
no, we
consider
did
it.
not. No, I'm not saying we didn't.
not yet, I
No.
don't know, but I do realize, and one of the things of a modular construction is that it's often two-story. Which you cannot do.
But with universal design, as a builder, I think that it does not add money to the cost of building or to the cost of design.
There hasn't been in this bill as it stands.
Yeah.
There is not a requirement that in order to qualify for the accelerator, the unit has to have universal design. It's not in the bill.
Was it
Right now.
discussed at all?
Not yet. It's gonna come to our committee.
Thanks.
One of the, but let's see, not but, and one of the tensions is we're throughout this bill trying to allow as much flexibility as possible, because one of the complaints about CHIPS and certainly about other programs are that they're so loaded up that small developers just can't do it.
Once again,
I know.
it doesn't
it's-
cost extra money.
Yeah, right. But no, I'm just saying that in drafting, we tried to keep it general and allow a lot of flexibility. I'm not saying that we couldn't amend the bill and put that in. It's just not there now.
We're waiting on proposed language for the bill from a couple of the departments to make sure that it would be along the lines of something we would want to consider. Didn't talk about it and say no.
Well, my point is that you didn't think of it.
Well, that's why it
That's why
comes to
we're at this
committee
point.
for conversation.
I have two quick questions. What's the difference? Is there a difference between modular and prefab?
Prefab would apply, prefab is anything that's pre-built, so that would apply to panelized homes the same way it would modular homes, even though they're two different.
And do you have, I know that you said as far as a price, a ballpark of nothing.
I'm just, the only ballpark is what I said. It's gonna be cheaper. It's definitely cheap. It's
cheaper
gonna
than a
be
stick built.
cheaper.
And-
Not, it's gonna be somewhat cheaper. My own view, personal view, is I would be surprised if it was more than. I would be really pleased if it came in at $200,000 cheaper. I wouldn't be surprised if that.
We do have a comparable number. New York launched a program very similar to this in September. They're building cross mods, which are basically a beefed up manufactured home. These are 1,500 square feet. They have a steeper pitched roof, they have a porch, they have a one-car garage, they have 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and they are about 250. Comparable homes right now, stick built, are like, you know,
Installed down the ground,
not the land, because the land, you don't know, is where the,
right?
really depends a lot, but that's installed and with, yeah, fines and cabins.
But that's also, those cross-built elements are built in a factory in Philadelphia, in
Pennsylvania.
I think those are from Pennsylvania.
those are from Pennsylvania. That's more like an elaborate manufactured home. Instead of being a double wide, it's a double wide plus a couple of single wides stuck on. Yeah.
So in a rural, really rural location, in a really rural location, what would a piece of land? I know there's probably variables, but as an average, what would a piece of land cost?
That's a wildly different.
But that's not what the money's going towards.
Well, that's not, yeah, that would be a developer's question, or and I can think of some municipalities that have land they're not gathering any taxes on,
Okay,
that they might want developed, so they could tax it. I don't think you can buy land for less than $3,000 to $5,000 an acre in Vermont, and I don't think you would want to build on that land.
Mhm.
It would, in realtor speak, it would have a site potential clearing with use, because it'll be a swamp on the side of the mountain. But I mean, it'll go up to $10,000.
What a special place.
You know, if it's easily developable and it's already perked and it already has road access and the power lines there, it's 15 acre, 20 an acre.
yeah, I know what you were saying, Leonore, I was just trying to get an idea of what that actual cost would be for that home with the land. That wouldn't be $250.
No, but with volumetric, you can build a quad on a very similar piece of land, and the amount of cost for the land per unit is
Mhm.
restored.
It's all of it is nibbling around the edge of the reality that the best solution is subsidy. And we don't have as much cash as we need to subsidize. I mean, none of these, none of these is affordable. The only housing that is affordable to people who are low income at the moment is manufactured home in home parks. And then very often, as you heard, with down payment assistance.
We talked briefly about this, but I just want to ask the question on the record, and that is, so we have this ACCD catalog of infill housing that doesn't include official designs that wouldn't require permitting, but did you give any thought to their part two, which is a catalog of housing that wouldn't require permitting? And would you consider in this accelerator prioritizing funding or purchase or ordering of those houses?
Yes, and I think that's where 802 Homes picks up, whether the designs are not finalized yet because of blueprints and building specs. But that's the starting point for the catalog.
Thanks.
I think they're good design, so that's, some manufacturers already have some models that are very economical, they may be able to say, yeah, we have this model, we already have everything we need. You do it for X amount of money, so. With a request for proposal, it would be very appropriate to use those.
Guess we're done.
One more question.
I just don't remember whether we determined that, or you determined in this, that what happens when the house gets resold. I mean, we can't find a $250,000 house on the market, right?
It would,
Regardless of what the land costs or
I think
whatever.
that would depend on what the financing stack for the developer looks like. In other words, if they work with the HFA or they work with one of the land trusts, then they may have.
A perpetual
they may have-
affordability.
That's something that
limited
the
equity.
financiers and the dealers put in, we're facilitating the orders. And it's certainly an option.
I recently, I know we're trying, financing stocks, I recently really dove into learning all of that. Interesting.
Yeah, and but just by the way, the co-authors are Edie Granning, Michael Marcotte, and two of them, our vice chair and our ranking member.
Finance stock expert.
We can